When one speaks of the Maya, the mind conjures towering pyramids piercing the jungle canopy, intricate hieroglyphic scripts carved in stone, and a calendar that mapped the heavens with astonishing precision. Welcome back to the Earthen Dawn. But cast aside these grand images for a moment. Our journey begins not with kings or monumental cities, nor even with writing or a complex pantheon. Instead, we venture back to an epoch from 2000 to 1000 BCE, the early Preclassic period, 8,000 years before any of these iconic achievements. This was a silent revolution, a foundational era defined by a humbler yet profound shift. The transformation from mobile foraging band to settled agricultural communities, driven by the cultivation of a single, unassuming grasp, maize. It was here, in this seemingly unremarkable stretch of time, that the very bedrock of Maya civilization was laid. Before monumental architecture and intricate calendars, before the very concept of Maya civilization as we typically conceive it, lay an epoch of profound transformation. The Archaic period, stretching from approximately 8,000 to 2000 BCE. For millennia, across what would become Mesoamerica, human life was defined by constant movement and intimate connection with the land. Imagine communities navigating the lowlands, dense tropical forests, meandering rivers, and resource-rich coastal plains, not as static inhabitants, but as skilled foragers. They adapted seasonal camps to nature's bounty, their diets varied, their knowledge of wild plants and animals extensive. Their challenging existence offered fluidity and resilience. Within this mobile existence, a subtle transformation began. Over countless generations, communities actively managed their environment. This was not yet agriculture in a recognizable sense, but incipient cultivation, a nuanced understanding of plant cycles. It led to selective harvesting, protection of favored species, and eventually, deliberate planting. Squash, beans, and chili peppers were key domesticated species, incrementally adding to the diet. But the wild ancestor of maize, teosinte, proved truly pivotal. Its domestication was a protracted process, unfolding over millennia far to the north, long before the early Preclassic. Yet, its increasing genetic viability and caloric yield steadily elevated its importance as it spread southward. Why abandon a deep-seated, mobile life and varied diet for the labor-intensive demands of settled agriculture? The answer lies in opportunity and necessity. The stable, favorable conditions of the Holocene climatic optimum provided an ideal backdrop for experimentation. Slowly, relentlessly, improved domesticates, especially maize, offered what wild foraging rarely could: reliable, concentrated surpluses. This consistent food production allowed for greater population aggregation. Product villages, semi-permanent camps with resource storage, began to emerge. The benefits of a dependable food supply, even with increased labor, began to outweigh constant mobility, laying the groundwork for a sedentary future. The Archaic period's subtle shifts laid groundwork. But in the early Preclassic, these nascent tendencies coalesced into a profound, irreversible transformation: the sedentary shift. At its core was the intensified cultivation of maize, maize. This grain, refined over millennia, offered unparalleled caloric yield per unit area. It promised a more reliable, though labor-intensive, food supply than foraging, shifting maize from supplement to essential staple. Such intensive agriculture demanded permanent presence and investment. Mobile hunter-gatherer camps gave way to the first true, though modest, villages. Sites like Coelho in modern-day Belize and Paso de la Ramada in Mexico's Soconusco region reveal these nascent communities. Small clusters of wattle and daub structures, often arranged in humble circles, signifying collective life. Yet, maize abundance alone was insufficient. Without means to process and, crucially, to store this bounty, sustained sedentary life remained precarious. This is where pottery became a critical innovation. More than a craft, it was a social and economic catalyst. Emerging around 1900 BCE, Barafate pottery, concentrated along the Soconusco coast, marked a pivotal moment. Distinctive, thin-walled tecummates, necklace jars, with intricate grooved decoration, suggest shared aesthetics and perhaps early communal feasting, signaling nascent social cohesion. The subsequent Okos phase, from roughly 1700 to 1500 BCE, saw expanding forms and increasing sophistication, introducing effigy vessels and highly decorated wares, hinting at social display and evolving ceremonial life. By the Z phase, spanning 1500 to 1000 BCE, local ceramic traditions proliferated across the Maya lowlands, solidifying pottery's widespread adoption and regional differentiation. Beyond aesthetics, pottery provided durable vessels for cooking, making dense maize gruels digestible. Its profound impact, however, lay in storage. Ceramic jars protected harvests from pests and moisture, enabling year-round sustenance and the accumulation of surplus, a critical buffer against lean times. A powerful feedback loop emerged. Efficient maize agriculture supported larger, permanent populations. These populations produced and relied on pottery for storage and preparation, which in turn allowed for greater agricultural intensification and settled life. This dynamic interaction provided the bedrock for slow, steady population growth and aggregation, laying the demographic foundations for all that would follow. As early Maya communities established agricultural permanence, their internal structures shifted beyond simple, dispersed family units. Kinship-based hamlets slowly aggregated into more coherent, structured villages, a necessary consequence of sedentary life and a growing populace. This aggregation demanded new forms of social cohesion and organization. Evidence for coordinated community effort, extending beyond individual households, appears as early public architecture. Sites like Coelho in Belize, for instance, revealed plastered floors and rudimentary platforms, communal spaces requiring collective planning and labor. Such shared undertakings signify an emergent collective identity and capacity for supra-household coordination. Within these developing villages, the first subtle lines of social differentiation appeared, not as rigid hierarchies, but as gradients of influence. Burial practices offer critical insights. While elaborate tombs were absent, some interments contained distinctive grave goods, perhaps a finely crafted Okos ceramic vessel or a rare jade bead. These variations suggest certain individuals held esteem or status, likely from skill, lineage, or generosity. Domestic contexts also reveal disparities in household wealth, with larger dwelling footprints or greater quantities of exotic materials, such as obsidian from distant highland sources, found in certain residences. Such access to non-local resources implies differential connections or economic success. The increasing complexity of material culture further hints at incipient craft specialization. While not yet full-time professions, certain households or individuals likely excelled in specific skills: pottery production, stone tool flaking, or resource processing. This specialization fostered early economic interdependence. Alongside these societal shifts, ritual practices evolved, solidifying communal bonds and providing arenas for social display. Archaeological finds indicate early ancestor veneration and shared communal rituals, including artifact catching, small altars, and the use of specific, elaborate ceramic forms in feasting. These practices reinforced group identity while offering opportunities for individuals or lineages to accrue influence through ritual expertise, laying groundwork for later complex social stratifications. No society exists in isolation. The early Maya world was no exception. As villages coalesced across the lowlands, a complex web of interaction stretched across the landscape, linking communities with each other and with distant neighbors. This interregional network, driven by necessity and desire, profoundly shaped the early pre-classic Maya. The imperative for trade was clear. Few regions possessed all resources necessary for a burgeoning sedentary lifestyle. From the Guatemalan highlands, precious obsidian, critical for sharp cutting tools, traveled hundreds of kilometers to lowland Maya sites like Coelho. Evidence from sources like El Chayal and Ixtepec indicates established routes and sustained demand. Jade, sourced primarily from the Motagua Valley, moved as a prestige good, transforming into beads and adornments marking emergent status. Marine shells journeyed inland from both Pacific and Caribbean coasts, valued for beauty and ritual significance. Even salt, a fundamental dietary necessity often scarce inland, was likely traded from coastal production centers, completing a robust exchange of vital goods. Beyond physical commodities, this exchange inevitably facilitated the diffusion of cultural practices and ideas. Ceramic styles, particularly the distinctive bara and later Ocos wares, found across vast areas, suggest the spread of shared aesthetic principles and manufacturing techniques. Early iconographic motifs, though rudimentary, also hint at a common visual language evolving across regions. This leads to the question of external influences, particularly from the early Olmec. While major Olmec centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta would reach their zenith later, their formative phases were contemporaneous with the latter part of the early pre-classic Maya. However, we must avoid an anachronistic view of simple, one-way Olmec influence. Archaeological evidence for 2000 to 1000 BCE strongly supports indigenous Maya developments in agriculture, sedentism, and social organization. The Soconusco region, on the Pacific coast, served as a vital zone of early interaction and innovation, possibly a bridge for reciprocal cultural exchange rather than simple adoption. For the early pre-classic, we emphasize contemporaneous formative developments and the independent growth of Maya societies, prior to any undeniable, widespread Olmec influence becoming apparent in the middle pre-classic. These interactions fostered not just commodity exchange, but also contributed to the bedrock of shared Mesoamerican traditions. Early evidence of pan-Mesoamerican cosmological concepts, communal ritual feasting, and even precursors to the ball game, though not yet within monumental courts, illustrates the early Maya participated in a broader cultural dialogue that would define the region for millennia. By the middle of the early pre-classic, around 1500 BCE, the cumulative shifts in the Mesoamerican lowlands reached a decisive inflection point. The widespread adoption of permanent village life, driven by intensified maize agriculture and reliable pottery for storage, pushed early Maya communities past a critical threshold. This transformation became irreversible. Maize, now the primary staple, allowed populations to remain settled, fundamentally restructuring daily life. Pottery, no longer a novelty, was an essential technology for processing and storing the bounty, solidifying sedentary existence. This new stability fostered collective endeavors. Early public spaces, like plastered floors at Coelho or nascent platforms elsewhere, emerged, signaling coordinated community effort. ritualized communal feasting further strengthened social cohesion. The aggregation of these factors, entrenched agriculture, systematic pottery production, and communal spaces, led to steady population growth and larger, structured villages. This was a point of no return. These innovations were now too deeply ingrained for a return to mobile foraging. This mid-early Preclassic period solidified the foundations, creating the stable base from which the monumental achievements of later Maya civilization would inevitably rise.
Yes, the earth has been generous.
By 1000 BCE, the landscape of the Maya lowlands was fundamentally transformed. The early Preclassic's pioneering shifts had culminated in widespread settled life. The region was dotted with numerous small, permanent agricultural villages, some reaching perhaps 1,000 inhabitants. This was no longer an experimental phase, it was an established reality. An entrenched agricultural economy, centered unequivocally on maize and supplemented by other cultivated plants, provided a reliable and robust food supply. This reliable sustenance facilitated basic social stratification, with discernible differences in status emerging based on lineage, skills, or control over resources and trade. Craft production had matured significantly. Pottery was a well-developed, regionally distinct technology, fulfilling essential utilitarian and ritual functions. Efficient stone tool production, using both local and imported obsidian, was widespread. Robust local and long-distance trade networks connected communities, facilitating a vital exchange of goods and ideas. Early ritual complexity, including communal feasting and ancestor veneration, solidified a shared cultural identity and community cohesion. Crucially, for all these foundational achievements, the defining hallmarks of later Maya civilization, monumental art, elaborate written scripts, and grand architectural programs, remained largely absent. These societies were poised on the cusp, prepared by a millennium of quiet innovation and consolidation, primed for the accelerated developments that would define the subsequent Middle Preclassic period. The monumental cities, intricate hieroglyphs, and precise calendars of the classic Maya did not materialize from an empty landscape. They stood upon a profound, often unseen foundation laid over a millennium prior, the early Preclassic period. Without the agricultural transformation that rooted mobile foragers, without the nascent social structures that organized communal life, and without early adaptations to the tropical environment, the grandeur that followed would have been impossible. This era, from 2000 to 1000 BCE, established the demographic and economic base essential for societal complexity. The consistent surplus of maize and other cultivated crops, solidified during these centuries, permitted a portion of the population to specialize, to become the priests, scribes, artisans, and eventually, the rulers. Many core elements of Maya culture, recognizable in their later manifestations, find their genesis here. The sacred importance of maize, specific ritual practices, growing social hierarchies, and indispensable inter-regional trade networks all coalesced. These early communities demonstrated profound ingenuity in adapting to and managing the challenging tropical forest environment, setting enduring patterns for centuries. The fundamental shift from constant movement to settled village life, from wild foraging to controlled cultivation, represented an irreversible commitment whose legacy extends beyond archaeology. The reliance on maize and patterns of village life persist in Mesoamerica today. To overlook this period is to miss the very genesis, the transformative power of history that made the Maya possible. So, if you enjoyed this journey into the profound beginnings of Maya civilization, be sure to subscribe to our channel to relive these epic pages of history.